Hello, I'm Bill Leopold, and welcome to this edition of Breakfast at the Barracks. Joining me today is Daniel Levi-Sanchez, a student and staff member at the Mason Gross School of the Arts here in Rutgers, New Brunswick. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi.
Your background and your biography is really about dance. So the first thing I'm going to ask, and the first thing I'm curious about is, how do you decide to be a dancer?
Well, I kind of see it like, you know in Harry Potter where they say the wand chooses the wizard?
Yeah.
It's kind of like that, where I feel like I didn't really make the choice to dance. It's something that happened right after birth. I mean, my mother, being from Puerto Rico, she constantly played music throughout the house. I mean, I was just immersed in music, and we had lots of family gatherings where music and dance just coincided. And I just, growing up, I just felt like that was a natural thing to do. When I was 12, though, in my hometown in Paterson, New Jersey, I saw a performance of the Inner City Ensemble Theater and Dance Company. And I watched them dance. They performed at the Great Falls Festival. They have I don't know if they still have it, but they had it back then. And I was mesmerized. They were doing things with music and dance that I've never seen before. Because growing up, there's lots of families that will just put their children in ballet right away. I mean, they grew up with that, but myself, ballet and jazz and modern wasn't a thing that was within my family. But when I was 12, I saw it for the first time, and I saw it with popular music. And once I saw it, I was hooked, so I auditioned for them, and I was accepted. I think when I was 14, I finally did that, and just did it ever since. Yeah.
You've had some pretty unique experiences from most perspectives. From Juilliard to American Ballet to really having opportunities that other folks don't have. Tell me, how did those opportunities present themselves, and kind of talk about your journey into Juilliard and past that?
Well, the way it goes about is, for a dancer, I mean, it's an erratic career. It's not very stable. But the way the opportunities present themselves is after I graduated from the Inner City Ensemble and then got into Juilliard, there's lots of opportunities out there, so you just have to audition. And there's lots of different companies, at least back then, to choose from. So what you have to do is basically is you have to inquire. You inquire through the dancers that you dance with, through teachers. I look through the trades, through the papers. And if you want to continue your career, I mean, it's something you have to do. And it is a science and an art, auditioning for companies.
Well, talk a little bit about that for me. It's a science and an art. So explain to me how someone might audition. Kind of talk a little bit about the science and the art combined.
Well, dancers, dance companies, they all have different criteria.
Okay.
So if you're going to, I'm just going to pick a company out of the hat. Let's just say Merce Cunningham.
Okay.
So if you want to audition, Merce Cunningham has auditions, and you see it and you want to go audition for them. What you have to do is, first of all, you need to understand what type of choreography or type of choreographer Merce Cunningham is.
All right.
And what you have to do is once you see the movement, you have to just know what it is you can and you cannot do. You have to and know what to expect when you go into an audition.
So at this point, you're teaching a new class here. It's called Hip Hop for Boys. So can you tell me kind of what the course is like and kind of what your mission is with the course?
Right. So through a Rutgers Extension division, I'm teaching this class for all boys, hip hop, but it's more along the lines of break dancing.
Okay.
And the main goal for the class is what I try to provide for the boys is a safe environment for them to express themselves physically.
Okay.
I use breakdancing as a vehicle because it's more accessible to them, and also it's a form that I became involved in when when I first started dancing when I was 14. Breakdancing just came about, and I was very curious about it, and basically taught myself to an extent, and then was asked to join a b-boy crew. So breakdancing is very much a part of my movement vocabulary, along with modern and ballet. So with the boys, I thought it was a perfect venue for them. And the way it works is I basically teach them the basics of breakdancing. We do what is called top rocking, which is when you're on your feet and you're doing some steps standing. Then you go down to the floor, you do the signature moves where you're on your hands and your feet, and you're doing back spins and things. And then we culminate it all within a freeze. And then that's it. And basically what that's called is a throwdown. So I teach them the steps to that, but it's very loose. And within that, they can just create whatever they want to do through it. I mean, it's just a framework for them. And they can create their own top rocks, their own floor moves, and they love it. I put different forms of music on. What I also try to do is teach them the history of the b-boy, how they came about, how the movement created through, it was something that came up through music. So yeah, that's basically what it is.
One of the things you talked about was the idea of movement. I think one of the things that we both can agree on is that folks are mesmerized by dance. They watch it, it moves them both cognitively and emotionally in lots of different ways. But folks don't really understand the idea of movement in terms of the theory behind it or what it means. Can you talk a little bit about movement in some ways and kind of how you kind of see that?
Right, well, the way I perceive movement, you know, within my body is it all starts with a pulse. I mean, basically, it could be either a heartbeat, it could be a construction site where you're hearing hammers, you know, banging, or just through music where there is a strong downbeat. And that might have just been from me growing up and my mother playing music throughout the house. I mean, there was always a constant beat within the household. And my body, you know, once I feel that pulse, it just translates into movement. And I mean, in the beginning as a child, movement is very exploratory.
Right.
You know, and as I became more interested in movement and many different forms of movement, it became a part of me. You know, like with, you know, growing up, there was American Bandstand, there was Soul Train, all of these different forms of dance that was coming about connected to pop music. So I became more interested in it, so I kept trying to emulate it. So I kept emulating the music, well, the movement from the things that I saw, Saturday Night Fever.
Right.
Then later on, once I finally saw a dance company performing jazz and modern, that just became another thing for me to emulate.
One of the things you talked about in the beginning was the conversation that dance sometimes, in terms of auditions, is a little hit and miss. You're not sure if you're going to get the next job. And I know for a while you worked at AT&T, so most folks don't think of dancers as having 9-to-5 jobs and then dancing. How did you make the decision to move from a career with AT&T into moving dancing full-time? How does one make that decision?
Well, it was almost something that made sense at the time. Being from in '92, I moved to the West Coast and I danced with a modern company there by the name of ODC San Francisco. And I worked with them till '98.
Okay.
And at that point, I decided to retire from dance. And a lot of it had to do with the question of, or at least for me, the question of what am I doing this for? Is this just an ego for me? And I felt like if that's really what dance was for me, then it didn't make sense to continue it unless I felt like I was giving someone something or giving something back. Okay. So I retired in '98. In 2008, my wife received partial funding to come out here to Rutgers to get a PhD in political science. So we all decided to move out this way, and I couldn't get a transfer out this. I tried to get a transfer from AT&T West to AT&T East. It just didn't work out. So my wife and I talked, and she said, well, why don't you go back to school and get a degree? Just get a degree in dance. It'll be easy because you can, you know, pull credits from the other, you know, schools that you went to. And at the time, it just sounded like a great idea. You know, just get a quick a BA, and then it'll be on my resume. Then I can, you know, get jobs. But it turned out to be a little more difficult than I thought. I didn't dance at all for 10 years. Okay. So I had to make a plan. And a lot of it had to do around stretching and strengthening. Okay. But I had to be really patient. I knew that if I tried to push too hard, I was going to tear a muscle or something. So, and the other thing too, the teachers, once I began in 2008 studying again here at Mason Gross, the teachers were really patient with me also. They understood where I was coming from. Okay. They kept telling me to, you know, calm down because, you know, as a dancer, you know, especially with myself, you know, you get this feeling you want to just dance, but, you know, my body just wasn't ready yet, so I couldn't do, you know, virtuosity was just something I had to kind of put on the back burner.
In the few minutes that we have left, are there some upcoming performances we can catch you in? Are there some things that are really special for you in terms of dance that are kind of on the horizon?
Well, what I'm hoping is in the spring that I'll be performing in a group piece with the students at Mason Gross. Okay. One of the teachers there, the professors, Julia Ritter, asked me to perform in the piece. So I'm very excited about that. Something I haven't done in a while, but I'm just looking forward to it.
Now, is there any chance that your hip-hop class might be performing for folks to be able to see?
Well, what I'm planning for them is a little performance, but it's a studio performance where we take classes. You know, towards the end of their classes, I think in January, I want to do something for the parents. So we're actually working on that now, you know, because it takes a while. And I know a lot of times it's fun and games, but, you know, we also have to start putting things together. Right. So I'm hoping to do something with them towards the first week of January.
Well, we want to wish you the best of luck with everything. It was fascinating to kind of hear your story and your ideas about dance and movement. We appreciate you being here with us today.
Thank you very much.
No problem. So we'll be right back. Stay tuned. So. Hello, I'm Bill Leipold, and welcome to this edition of Breakfast at the Barracks. Joining me is Catherine Urich, Professor of Chemistry and Dean of Math and Physical Sciences at Rutgers, New Brunswick. Catherine, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Bill.
We're glad to have you here, and we're going to jump right in. Polymers.
Polymers.
Don't really know what they are, don't really understand them, but that's what your research involves.
Yes. So I guess one simple way to describe polymers are plastics.
Okay.
So plastics, people know plastics are polyester. You know, it could be fabrics, it could be paint on a wall, you know, urethane bumpers, foams, all that kind of stuff is really what a polymer or plastic is.
All right.
What is unique is about a polymer. Poly means many, like a polygon. Mer means unit, so it's many units that are linked together that give it a different property than a single unit.
Okay.
What does that really mean? It's a plastic. It has these special properties. I'll jump ahead. So my research is focusing on biodegradable polymers or plastics, and we focus on polymers that can break down whether in the body or in the environment, which means we're also thinking about polymers that can be biocompatible, meaning they're compatible with the body or the environment. Right. And so we try to design new polymers from scratch that can meet all these different cool applications.
Design polymers from scratch. So does that mean poly, we go back to your definitions,
Yes.
means many, and per means one. So are you going back and kind of working with molecular structures?
Yes, well, I'm a chemist, so I'm
Okay.
a polymer chemist. What chemists do, specifically synthetic chemists, let me
right.
know when this gets out of control.
No, this is great.
So a synthetic chemist means you synthesize things. So we figured out how to take these units and create them and link them all together. So again,
Okay.
so that the big molecule will have a different property. Let me dial back a little bit. So a natural version of a polymer is something like DNA. So you know DNA has 4 units, has 4 base pairs. That just these 4 units can be linked together in a variety of ways that make DNA. So that make
Okay.
all of us individuals. But all our DNA is really based upon 4 units.
Oh, wow.
So it's actually really complex structures out of 4 very simple units. So I'd say one of the interesting things, lots of interesting things out of my laboratory, but perhaps the one that's farthest along is a polymer I call polyaspirin, meaning it's a polymer that's made out of a molecule that's like aspirin.
Okay.
So aspirin actually is a compound that can be found in nature, or a derivative of it found in nature, found in willow bark, willow leaves, myrtle. So there's a long history of aspirin being used to help enable pains.
Okay.
So they take these small molecules that are found in all these different plants. What we do is we take them and make them into a plastic. So that plastic will serve one function, but then the plastic will biodegrade into something else and behave as a aspirin.
Oh, wow.
So the example
very
that we have that's farthest along is something that we call like using the polyaspirin for a cardiac stent. So we're in New Jersey. A lot of people know about J&J and their cardiac stents, and these
Right.
are little pieces of metal that they put in your heart in order to enable blood to flow through. Well, what happens is that sometimes you get scar tissue forming on them, and so that enables you don't get blood flowing through anymore. And so then they put in these metal pieces just to, again, to make sure that it tends to occur. But imagine metal is very different than your blood vessels, right?
Right.
Very different properties. And so I designed a polymer plastic that has properties very similar to arteries. And so this is a polymer plastic that biodegrades, but it biodegrades very slowly at a time, so you can get the natural cells to regenerate and regrow and kind of diffuse themselves and replace them on this polymer. After 6 months, the polymer's gone and you just have healthy tissue there left, which is completely different. So right now, they walk around with a little piece of metal in your heart.
Right.
But yeah, so you're making a face because everybody's making a face like, oh, how's that work?
No,
But-
it's not so much about how that works. Is how do you become interested in that? Like, do you wake up one morning when you're a child and say, this is what I'm interested in? Like, how did you become interested in kind of moving in this direction?
Boy, that's a long, let's say that's a 45-year question. No,
Wow.
I've always been interested in my life and very curious, and so I'm always trying to figure out what I can do and apply my knowledge and apply my interest towards. But the polyaspirin in general, I've told this story probably many times. The idea for having a polymer that can break down into something like aspirin came to me when I was teaching organic chemistry. So for the students, any Rutgers students who are watching this or alumni, it's Chem 311.
Okay.
So it was an 8 o'clock class. It was over on Douglas campus. And so I was teaching them how they're going to make aspirin, which is they were acetylating salicylic acid to make acetyl salicylic acid, which is what aspirin is. So I was telling them how they're going to take this molecule, add this thing on, and then you're going to get your aspirin. And while I was explaining to the class, it was an 8 a.m. class, I started thinking about how that could be integrated with my own research program.
Right.
So my research program at the time, this is in 97, I believe, my research program at the time was trying to design polymers, again, that are biodegradable that could be used to replace bone. And I knew from my work at MIT that usually when you make the polymer, the plastic, that doesn't cause a lot of problems with the body. It's when the plastic starts to break down.
Right.
So I thought, oh, well, what if I make a plastic that could be used that will do this, whatever I want it to do, and it'll break down into something useful instead of something harmful. And looking at the structure of the aspirin molecules, it's like, oh, I could do this. I'm going to take this, and I'm going to make my first thought was a biodegradable suture.
All right.
I'm going to make a biodegradable suture that slowly breaks down into this aspirin, which means you're getting the pain and inflammation to occur wherever you have your stitches, for example, and you don't have to take the aspirin tablet which goes everywhere in your body.
Right.
So the idea is it's a localized delivery of the drug, yet the plastic itself is actually holding tissue together, so it's serving a function. And so it was, people talk about an aha moment. It was absolutely an aha moment. It's just like, you know, the stars align, things happen. And I still remember this moment is, wow, I could do something absolutely new and different. And
Wow.
I turned away from the class because I was like,
All excited?
I'm so excited. I can't believe this. Kind of wrote down a note, kind of took my breath and started teaching again. So it was just, I don't know how to explain it. It was just,
Very cool.
it was just very cool. So I go back to my office and start looking through the literature, start doing patent searches to see, and it just turns out that nobody had ever thought of this idea. Something very simple. Taking a polymer or plastic that breaks down, biodegrades into something useful, because usually, again, it's harmful. So it's completely rocked many people's worlds.
So from that, you also created a corporation, right?
Yes, I started my first company, Barracks, in 2000 based upon that concept. Right now, I think we're starting on company 4 and 5 right now. So company 1 converted into company 2. We just sold company 2 to another company, which I'm not able to disclose yet, out in California. So it's just interesting to see how all this stuff pans out.
So let's talk about this, because what I'm hearing is the fact that I'm seeing somebody who was a scientist, a chemist, kind of looking at stuff, and now talking about patents, which turns into corporation. So there's a couple different things going on for me. There's the scientist perspective, there's the manager perspective, and there's the business perspective. So kind of explain to me how one gets from the, aha, I discovered this, to it becomes marketable and creating a company.
Ooh, that's not
Yeah,
something we can
those.
do very simply. Well, so after the idea, I go back to my office, think about
Right.
it, and started contacting Rutgers and saying, look, I think this is worthwhile filing a patent. So I worked with Rutgers to file the first of many patents that we now have on this. And from that, I started going to my science conferences and talking about it, and word just started getting out on the street that, you know, there's this really interesting idea. And there was venture capitalists, there was people starting to approach me saying, wow, that's pretty interesting. What are you going to do with this?
Oh.
And I didn't necessarily know what I wanted to do, but one of the things I did know, I enjoyed teaching. I love doing research. I knew I didn't want to have to leave Rutgers to start a company.
Okay.
But I knew the timing was such, in terms of the economics and stuff, that it would be an opportunity to take something that was invented in my lab, actually made by one of my undergraduate students for the very first time, that was developed at Rutgers and made into a product. And so just really working with Rutgers, you get the patents, we pulled people in place, the right business people who started this company, and you work with them to figure out what are the studies that you need to do in order to make it happen, generate more capital, reinvest it, and it just continues on.
Wow.
So to me it seems obvious, but if you have this really cool idea and you want to see people use it, ultimately you have to patent it, because you probably have heard this from if you don't have the patent, then nobody wants to invest the gazillion dollars or $1 billion that it takes to develop a drug, for example.
Now, has it gotten easier to develop company number 4 and 5 in terms of company number 1 sounds somewhat like a learning process?
It was.
And now company 4 and 5, was it a little easier to kind of put those together, knowing the sequence of events that need to go in place?
Yes. I mean, I think 4 and 5 was easier, not just in terms of the sequence of events, but also I've gone through the process of understanding what I want to get out of it and what the process is.
Yep.
I'd say, like, the first time you do anything, it's always the hardest. You know, your very first exam that you take in college is always the worst one. It doesn't matter what it is. But then you kind of get the hang of it, you know, get the system figured out. So by this time, I realized, you know, let's define the problem. Let's get the right people in place. Let's get the right capital, where it's going to happen, how we want to manage this. And you just know more. That's, with experience, helps.
I want to talk about your lab. Before we started the interview off camera, we were having the conversation, and you lit up when you talked about your students, both your undergraduate students and your graduate students, and you really called them, you know, this team that you really count on. Can you talk to me about the environment in your lab and kind of who's there?
Yes, so we'll get back. So, yeah, my group is awesome. So the energy, the diversity, that's just the joy of doing research on a big university or big, great campus like Rutgers. So right now I have about 5 or 6, I guess 6 undergrads from chemical engineering, biomedical engineering, chemistry, pharmacy, from all different kind of walks of life.
Okay.
My graduate students tend to come from chemistry and biomedical engineering and chemical engineering. My postdocs also come from a variety of things. So we all work on different projects together, and they all bring different perspectives. It's just a really vibrant, exciting opportunity. And now I'll get back to the polyaspirin because I think that's the easiest for me to understand, to explain a little bit. So with this idea, I came back to my lab and had an undergraduate student. We worked out the plan, but she's the one who actually made it, you know.
Oh, wow.
So she was the very first one to make it, and see that it's now in cardiac stents is pretty amazing. But, you know, I have to give her, we defined the problem, and she kind of, at one level, this particular example, can figure it out. But then you also have to give them the flexibility to go on and imagine new things, because, you know, just you have 15 heads together thinking about these issues, it's just going to be a more phenomenal thing than you have a single person, for me, telling them all what to do.
So when you manage the lab, because my sense is, how do you take the teaching and put it into practice? Because it seems like they kind of come together very clearly in the lab in some way or another.
Well, a lab is teaching. I mean, you're teaching people how to think. You're teaching them how to solve a problem. You're teaching them how to interpret their data. You're teaching them how to set up things. I mean, for the type of chemistry that I do, it's very much like teaching somebody how to cook or to bake.
Okay.
You know, you have to know, for the bakers out there, it's like you know, if you're weighing out a cup of flour, you kind of have to make sure it's exactly a cup of flour. It can't just be rounded off. You can't be I mean, it all affects your results. And so teaching them, walking them through the process of how to do it right, and once they build the basics, then they can go and explore. I can add a pinch of this, or I can change that a little bit.
Right.
So I figure what I need to do is ground them in the basic skill set and encourage them and give them an environment they can go explore on their own.
Great. So I want to thank you for being here. We've run out of time.
Oh,
no, that's great.
Wow, that was fast.
No, we've learned so much already, so I appreciate it.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for this edition of Breakfast at the Barracks. For more information about any of the subjects we've discussed here today, please visit our website at ruckers.tv. For all of us at the Rutgers Division of Continuing Studies, I'm Bill Leipold, and thank you for watching.